written on your web page is getting a little old and so on. So much better you give us the right information. Um, just before I switch off my microphone, we have a lot of messages here from where people come. So it's wonderful. I think all Nordic countries are well represented, and maybe also other part of the world. Yes, very good. Okay, then please, Marcia, the screen is yours.
Sounds wonderful. Let me get this set up so I know where I'm going. First, good morning, everyone. I realize for you it is not morning, but for me it is here. And we may actually even hear my family come in or come through the house in a few minutes, wondering what in the world I'm doing up at this hour, but more importantly, who I'm speaking with. But I told them that you were people that I don't normally have a chance to talk with, and so they completely understood why I was doing this. But I truly appreciate you for joining us, and that will really help a lot. I should point out that while the comment was made that you may or may not have read the book, or I may know a lot about social learning, my overall intention today is to help you see that you all right now understand social learning. And you may not be comfortable or familiar with the words, but that you are very comfortable with the ideas. We have been learning socially our entire lives. If we've had the opportunity to be learning from other people, with other people, being serving as formal educators or informal educators, just sharing something we know with someone else, then we have been learning socially. And I'm frankly a little saddened that we now think of it as a official term or a specific idea, because from my vantage point, it takes away from the idea that this is a natural process, something that we have been doing for a long time. And in fact, I'll be candid and say I was very resistant to even putting the word social learning in the title of the book, because I think it takes away from the idea that it is just an extension of how we have been learning together for so many years. But having said that, I'm happy to answer questions also. I don't think there's a better term or a better way to express learning together, but I often will refer to it specifically as learning socially, as opposed to this buzz phrase, social learning. So enough on that. My intention today is to walk you through some of the core ideas behind this, with the idea that you can then share them with your friends and colleagues, perhaps other people who don't really recognize that this is something that they have been doing for a long time already, even in a formal classroom environment, or something they do with their family or their friends or the community that they live in. So having said that, I'll go through a few slides, but my hope is that we can answer questions. I must admit on this interface, it's a little challenging to read the questions as well, but I'm hoping that I'll take breaks and be looking at them. But maybe if somebody puts stars or something there that I can quickly notice them, that would be the easiest way to answer those questions too. So having said that, the new social learning, transforming your work through collaborative technologies, is our overall objective for our time together today. The reason this is important is because that our society, our globe, our world has changed. These are all international or say or global types of statistics, but I encourage you to read them instead of me reading them to you. Uh, but we see an increase not only in who is using technology, but how people are connecting globally. So let me give you a moment to scan through that. I noticed that somebody in the chat had asked if we could use different colors to highlight questions. That's wonderful. So I haven't quite figured out how to change the color for the questions, but yes, if you know how to do that, or maybe somebody else can type in how to do that. I'm quite comfortable, say, going back and forth, but we'll look out for those different color questions. So if we have 5 billion mobile phone subscribers 7 out of 10 adults worldwide, if we have 1 trillion connected intelligent devices throughout the world, if 50% of the world population is under 30, and we are losing productivity because of these devices, because we are using them in some ways simply to reach out and not necessarily considering their use for learning, then I think we have a tremendous opportunity to be working and learning and thinking differently. But of all the statistics actually here, my very favorite is that 9 in 10 adults, according to ComScore, will trust the recommendations from personal friends and virtual strangers over any other source. That would include teachers, that would include marketers, that would include people who have traditionally been in a role to be able to either sell you an idea or sell you something tangible. And so now we need to be thinking more carefully, more specifically, as frankly we should have been all along, but we haven't. And now is our chance to rectify that. That we need to be thinking about how we influence one another and who is influencing those that we want to be influencing, not in a manipulative way, but in a truly authentic, let's think about how we make our decisions, how we learn what we need to be learning, and how we can be able to learn more as a result of that. So you can see me a little bit more clearly. All right. So I believe, and my intention here is to convey, that our world demands progress, that we think more specifically about how we have been doing things over time. It is amazing to me, frankly, that we have, especially in the education sector, have thought that one person it was somebody's sole responsibility to be educating us at various times in a classroom, for example, when we know of how the brain works, how learning happens, that we are influenced and we are taking in information from so many sources. So the idea, even ceremonially, that it is one person who is our educator and that any one person could have all the information we need is, in my opinion, a little ridiculous. And it is wonderful, finally, to be considering how we actually take in information, how we make decisions. And so that sort of progress, to me, is a fabulous step forward in our society. But let me give you an example, because for some people this all seems very abstract. No, I take it back. I don't think the idea of learning from one another seems abstract, but how this can be used or changes truly in a environment, in an organization, I think is a little bit more unusual. So let me give you the example of TELUS. TELUS is a global telecom company based in Vancouver, Canada. A far more northern community than I perhaps live in, but not one, I suspect, more similar in some ways to some of where the people who are participating here are living. And so TELUS, working specifically in the telecom space of helping to put in phone lines, of helping create cable connections, things like that, has they're considering how they're using social learning. Before I begin my story, I do want to point out, I just saw the question about hashtags for the seminar, and you can use the social learning. I don't believe someone has created that yet, but you're also free or welcome to use new social learning, new social learn, which is the tag that we use around the book a lot. So actually, let me just, I'll type that here, but that is new social learn. So that might be the easiest one if someone has not created a specific event for this, and that doesn't pull up so many tags that it would we wouldn't be able to track the conversation here. So let me explain a little bit about TELUS. So well, actually not about TELUS, but about what's happening there. So imagine yourself at the top of a telephone pole. You are out in a fairly cold climate, the wind is rushing by you, but truly just spend a moment thinking about what it might be like at the top of a telephone pole, perhaps quite different than where any of us are right now. So the top of that telephone pole would seem, in all practical purposes, as different as possible from how we normally consider how we are learning, or even the idea of learning together. Well, at the top of that telephone pole, which you are on right now, because the person who's is the closest to where you are has lost their telephone service, and it's late and it's windy and it's cold, and you are the technician who is responsible for getting everything to be working again to meet that customer's needs. You are up there and something just doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right to you. You've done this 100 times before, but you can't quite put your finger on it, but you know that something is different. Well, if you are a technician from TELUS, and it's very likely that you have been issued a small camera, a flip phone, and you can reach into your pocket or climb back down and go to your truck and get that out. And with that small flip phone, the small flip camera actually, up there in the on the telephone pole, you can actually view all the way around you 360 and be able to capture the feeling you have up there, and also capture the box where the connections are being made. And within 2 clicks, you can upload that video and then very easily tag and ask a question associated with what's going on. And that will be uploaded to the internet, the internal system, the social learning system actually at TELUS. And within several seconds of this actually happening, you will, in this particular instance, you will get stories and you will hear responses back from your colleagues all over the world. In this particular instance, when I heard this story, one of the person who uploaded the film's colleagues replied, "Oh, you have been out and you don't know that this change has happened," and quickly entered in what that change was. Another said, "Oh, you've done this 100 times. Trust your gut. Listen to yourself to be able to figure this out. I have confidence in you." Another one said, "I have actually no idea what the problem is, but when you figure it out, would you please upload it, because we will all be in that situation at some point and we will want to hear the answer as well." And then a fourth replied specifically with, "I was on that poll several days ago and this was the situation, here was the information," and with a link directing the person back to additional notes that they did not have before. By yourself, in a remote location, feeling the power of your colleagues worldwide to be learning from and learning with. This may seem very leading edge and very different than what we imagine, but we're talking about very simple technologies, a very small community that we're able to tap into the right people at the right time, using fairly inexpensive technology that is available most to everyone around the world. Though it is not available to everybody today. It's the type of thing that is beginning to become available, and we just need to start thinking differently about how we can connect people to be learning from one another, wherever and whatever they need to be learning about. I have been working on, actually, like you, social learning my whole life. In this particular instance, I have been helping corporations. That has been the vast majority of my work for my entire corporate career, on helping bring what I consider humanity back into the corporate walls, meaning helping people understand people, to be able to tap the rich, wonderful resources they have between one another to be able to do more. It just so happens that today we call that social business, or enterprise 2.0, or learning 2.0, or work 2.0, or however you want to call it. It doesn't really matter to me, frankly, the name, nearly as much as the idea that, as Deb Schultz, my friend, pointed out, technologies change, but humans don't. We may evolve a small bit at a time, but it really is our opportunity to be able to use the technologies to be able to connect people to do the important work, and that's the core, the key overall. So the question was raised, could you tell us a little bit about social learning for behavior change? Well, the term social learning was first used formally in the 40s to be able to be talking about the theory of social learning. And that specifically was a behavioral theory where you are watching what someone else is doing and modifying or shaping your activities as a result of what they are doing. Now, if the social learning that we're talking about today is not all that different from it, but I think there are some key important differences. But in that particular case, if you, uh, let's say we talk about, small children, if you were mimicking or you're watching someone do something and then you are changing your behavior to actually meet that or match that, that is what will be considered in the historically social learning theory. There's more to it, and I will not spend my time going into it here, but there is a no shortage of information available out in the world about that mimicry or that behavioral modeling based on what you witness, you experience other people doing too. I do point out that they're using technologies, for example, like Twitter or even a Facebook stream, using the most basic of commercially available software tools. We witness people doing this. For example, maybe someone puts up on their Twitter stream that they're going to watch a certain television program, and another person thinks to themselves, oh, I forgot that show was on tonight, so I'm going to watch it too. Well, in that case, that would be mirroring. They're changing behavior as a result of something that they witnessed, even though they can't physically see that person. So sure, that would be very similar. However, from my perspective, the term or the idea of social learning theory is very limiting. I view social learning as a far broader definition of the idea of learning and building information, being able to change our understanding of the world as a result of being able to interact with other people, not just doing what they are doing, which is in large part what that term has meant, but the idea that we can build from what we have learned. So let me give you an example. So I changed my behavior just now as a result of seeing that question. I would have easily gone to the next slide, and I'll do that just in a moment. But as a result of that interaction, I am not just writing another question too. I saw a question. So social learning theory in that particular instance would dictate that I then am going to think, oh, I have a question. I should ask that also. But instead, I'm doing what will be considered from a learning theory perspective, constructivism. So I take my understanding of the question that was asked, I then build on top of that, or I add to that based on my understanding of the world around me. And together we are constructing something new, a conversation, in this case, I don't know, one and a half a way back and forth as a result, and changing the way I reacted or how I am proceeding, constructing that new understanding. And as a result of that, I am doing something differently. So how we see that happen in the world of work, for example, or the world of education for that matter, is that it's a discourse based on questions that are asked and answers that are provided. But that's still very basic. The larger opportunity is that when somebody asks a question, you think to yourself, I don't know the answer, or I need to be seeking the answers from other people, or somebody says, I do have a little bit of the answer, and a little bit of an answer and a little bit of an answer, we actually start considering the world around us in different sorts of ways because we're getting different perspectives, ones that we wouldn't have seen ordinarily, independently of the opportunity for many people as the collective knowledge soup could be sharing together. And as a result of pieces of what people are each bringing to the table, even if each person is a thorough expert in an area, they still aren't having a complete solution to everything we are doing. If we think about it really, that when somebody else has a full solution, I take that into myself, I'm still having to apply how that varies in my world in order to apply this to making a change or be able to do something different in the work that I'm doing. So we have that construction of ideas, of actions, of experiences, of skills, and together we can bring something together better than anyone of us could have done alone. I think you'll see a little bit more of that as we go on. I see perhaps a follow-up, but let me move along, and then I'll look forward to continuing on this a bit. Let me get into some definitions because I suspect we'll struggle with all those until we address them. So from this perspective, this is how I define these terms. So social media is technology used to engage 3 or more people. And I'll explain just in a moment why I consider that 3 people or more. Social learning is participating with others to make sense of new ideas. So in this particular case, I could be that I'm changing my behavior as a result of it. It could just be I'm changing my thinking about it. It could be that I am just considering something in a new and different way. It could be that I'm actually considering in a way that I've considered 100 times before, but perhaps there is a small change along the way. And that's where the learning comes in. That's what makes it learning, is that there is some small, perhaps, change that has happened in the perception along the way. And then what is new is how powerfully they work together, how social media and learning can be working together. I personally do not believe that technology is required for social learning to happen. In this case, it is. We're mediating our conversation through this interface. But if two people are sitting beside each other right now, either listening to me or talking with one another, then they have just as much of an opportunity to be learning from one another, participating with others to make sense of new ideas, without requirement of any sort of technology at all, other than the technology of their voices, perhaps, or as you can see, my hands as I wave them around, which is something as I am prone to do consistently. But what is so powerful now is the idea that we can use small, light, agile technology tools, or frankly, big, heavy systems too, that have sharing capabilities. We can use them to be able to extend, expand, to widen, to far distance our ability to be able to connect with people. So it widens our reach, it deepens our access to people we may never have had access to before. And that powerful combination of our human ability and human interest in learning from one another, our deep-seated genetic need for evolution to be learning from one another, is now widened and extended across the miles, across oceans, across distances, and also even within inside of an organization, into corners that we may never have been able to access, or at least not access easily before. So again, it is that, for me, the power that we're talking about right now, today, in 2011, is the intersection of the social media tools and the opportunity to be learning in not so much in different ways, but in broader and deeper ways than we ever have before. At this point, I also recognize, and I want to point out, is that when we think about social learning, it is, from my perspective, it is far too simplistic to assume that that means through just Twitter or Facebook or even YouTube or an online community that you may be using within your community. As I said, social learning can happen with or without those technologies. But each of those technologies I just referenced, in most cases, are commercially available, what are considered consumer or Web 2.0 type tools. And they're invaluable. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, you know that I found them to be a tremendous and effective way to be able to finding information I wouldn't have gathered otherwise, and be able to reach out in ways that I haven't in the past. Facebook, and for many people as well. However, there's an entire new class of technologies that are available in a similar way to Twitter, for instance, micro-sharing tools, or Facebook online community or social networking tools that are available specifically for inside the firewall of organizations. So there, we now see technologies and micro-sharing tools available for inside organizations, from inside of academic institutions, inside of departments even. And so we have Yammer, and we have Social Text, and we have the wonderful Social Cast, and I can go on and on. I write about many of these tools very often, and you can also find more on any one of them at the new social learning website, which will be, I think, referenced in a little while as well. But that's also what we're talking about here. We're not just talking about the commercial tools that we often, too frequently, hear are being used just for teenagers, but they are specifically designed for inside the enterprise use. And so we need to be mindful of those two, because I think that's where the real learning and opportunity is, not so much in publicizing all the things they're asking, but finding people who share your interests, your concerns, and be the most likely to have answers to your questions that can all be working together using those sorts of tools. These are the categories that I most frequently refer to as social learning categories, or social media categories, specifically and beneficially for learning, though all of them, frankly, are useful. So that is the first category, being social networks or online communities. As we say, outside the firewall, that'd be something like Facebook, Orkut. There are many of them. They've been, in some cases, they have been in existence for decades, and now they have additional applications that can be used specifically with inside of organizations. Media sharing, everything from the commercially available YouTube and other sorts of places where we can share videos, but there's also podcasts where we can share audio, but also files, courses, any sort of media that we are sharing with one another. But it's not just a matter of sending it out. That would be all too similar, for example, to email, but that we're sharing information and we have the ability to what we consider socializing it, which I'm not sure is the right term here, but that is often how it's described, where you can actually be able to rate, be able to learn from others, be able to customize in many cases, and be able to learn with other people as a result of sharing of that information. Then there's microsharing, which is most commonly thought of as Twitter, but there are there are actually almost 40 specific applications for use within the firewall of microsharing, small, very discrete messages, often limited to 140 characters, though some applications do a little bit more, because 140 characters on a telephone is actually how many it can, with some headers, is all that actually can take. That's why they're short, and that's why they are that length. Living content, which would be considered wikis, for example, or any Google Docs, any sort of document that you're able to add to, but have multiple people contributing to editing and being able to track those changes. And that's really the huge benefit of those sorts of tools right now, is being able to track those changes and be able to see how over time we together are growing what we know and how we're able to use it. And then virtual immersive environments, everything from Second Life to other sorts of virtual reality or virtual applications where we're able to physically seem like we are beside one another and learning together, even though we may be very, very far away. It dawned on me as I get to the bottom of this one that I didn't speak to actually a point that I made in the previous slide about why is social media for three or four more people. In this particular case, I want to point out it's not required. Two people learning with one another is social learning from my perspective, and they may be using a social media tool and it may just be two of them, but the research shows that when you have the entrance of at least a third person, you actually see a change in how they are working. For the first time, you actually begin to see where that constructivism is actually happening, where that third voice, it changes the dynamic, so it's not just back and forth, but that third voice, even if that third voice is changing from who is speaking, for people to think, oh, there has to be a mixing and a changing of the way we're thinking about these things in new and different ways. And that research has been borne out pretty consistently, so that's three or more. So I tend to think of social media not so much as email when it's just you and I going back and forth, or even in a chat, for example, where I'm on Skype, for example, sending out a message and somebody is sending it back. Yes, technically, you could say that as social media, but there's not really that, somebody asked before, the behavior change, or actually even necessarily the changing of thinking going on that happens more readily when there is a third person joined in. So, a question again is living content once again. So what we have considered content historically has been the creation of something. I write a book, I write an article, I publish it, and as soon as I complete that, it is considered done. In the intelligence community, for example, that is considered finished work. The problem with that is that it's also, I hate using the word, but I think it is the most accurate, dead. It doesn't have any life left to it. There isn't any additions to it. There isn't any changing. It is the way it is. You may have revisions, but then that original document has to create and become something new for it to get any of that life or breath back into it. There are now tools available, for example, wikis or something like Google Docs, or as we're beginning to see in the next version of Microsoft Office, that there is the capabilities for many people, or even just two for that matter, but I also go back to my three makes it better, that we can actually continue living through that document. So you may see a version of it on a certain day, but you can also see the history of who made changes, how it used to work, and you can never view, if you choose, you never have to see that document as completed and not changeable. It is as alive and as vibrant and as current as people who are willing to contribute to it. So therefore, I consider, say, living content versus dead content. It's not they publish once, it is the way it is. It's actual a true representation of the information as we know it today, or is somebody willing to update it, and we can be working together using and developing that content over time. That doesn't just have to be for large documents. For example, we see blogs where somebody is creating something, and that person actually has the capabilities to go in and update it as they'd like. But you also see comments, and I think we're moving to a place where we will see people who are actually contributing to specific points of that blog, not just in the comments, but that it is more the back and forth, the richness that comes, the vibrancy that comes from the engagement between, say, two, and in my case, I think more often 3 people. There's another question here. Let me just read that, and then I'll move on. If learning has always been social and technologies are 10 years old, is the new in the book title referring to something specific? Well, the new is referring to the opportunity that for the first time ever, that while Twitter is about 5 years old for all practical purposes, but most people didn't even know about it even 2 years ago, and online communities maybe 20 years ago, their widespread use and adoption is truly what is new. That is for the first time people taking in these social media tools and thinking about how they can be specifically applied to learning. That to me is what the opportunity is. And frankly, I'll admit that I work with many people who cannot even imagine that social media tools are used for anything more than marketing. That is the frame from which they come from. They view them completely as a larger megaphones to reach wider communities, wider audiences, and they don't think about that as a learning opportunity. That's the frame I come from. That's the world I come from. That's how I view the entire world, in fact, as an opportunity to be learning. And so to me, these tools seem natural opportunities to connect people, for them to be learning over the miles. But as I said, others just view them purely as a marketing, sharing out of information, and not the two-way exchange. You talk to good marketers and they'll say, well, that's crazy. Even good marketing is that engagement. But to me, the new in the title of the book, or the new really in all that we're talking about, is the opportunity to be able to mix and mingle and be able to really pull together this vibrant conversation that has never been so easy to do before, so convenient to do, so inexpensively, frankly, to do before. So many of these tools are even available free of charge. You can just download them or just access them on a software as a service site, or as a cloud-based tool, or something that is very easy and convenient to access. So what are the benefits of doing any of these sorts of things? Well, there's a lot of research specifically in this area about the various benefits. This happens to be one study done by ASTD and I4CP, sponsored by Booz Allen Hamilton, and some of the top benefits of why organizations in particular were interested in social media for learning were to improve knowledge sharing, foster learning, provide more informal learning opportunities, improve communication, find resources more easily, be as an expert directory. That's what that's considered. Who is it that knows this information to share it? For boosting collaboration and building organizational relationships. I love Frank Budmere pointed out the phrase 2.0 isn't a tool, it's a state of mind. The idea that any of these things are really a different framing of how we think about learning, of how we think about being social. In many people's minds, social is almost a dirty word. It's not something we want people to do. We don't want them to be social. That would be a waste of time. Well, that's how we as a species have evolved, is by interacting, taking in what's around us, being able to learn from one another. And so this is an evolution, a mindset, really, that, from my perspective, that we're getting back to how we naturally do this. And that's where, to me, the 2.0 is a little bit of a misnomer. If anything, it's the reaching back to the roots of how we've done this, and now just doing that with more modern tools. That really is the opportunity for us. What I often hear, though, is that people say, oh, I just can't do this. My organization isn't ready, or I just don't understand it well enough to progress. Well, the first thing I would say is you're already doing it. You may not be using the social tools, but hey, you were here today, so you're clearly beginning to use those social tools, and I applaud you for doing that. But we're really at the beginning of this curve. And so when we talk about the Rogers diffusion curve of innovation, which I suspect many of you have seen before, we're actually very early on here. You're not too late to the party if this is a new idea to you. What we find in my work, for example, is largely with large international corporations. We're seeing less than 10% adoption widespread of social media tools within the enterprise, not necessarily for how they're marketing out to the world. That actually, those numbers are a little higher, but how they're using those technologies specifically inside their organization to be learning from one another, to increase the engagement of how people are interacting and being able to improve what they're doing inside the enterprise. So we're saying it to be about a little less than 10% today of large corporations doing that. Academic institutions, far lower, far lower. I would say we're talking about maybe 2 or 3% of large academic organizations worldwide who are actively using social media to help people within the organization learn from one another. Now, does that mean that there are not most every, if not every college student on the planet of accessing these tools in order for them to be learning individually? Yes, that is happening. But from an organizational perspective, from a company or a school or any sort of institution doing this intentionally, thinking to themselves, this is an important aspect of how we're learning. We should be capitalizing on this. We're very, very early on in this process. And so it's definitely by no means too late for you to be learning more about it, to be learning and to be able to be employing these sorts of tools and technologies within your organization. The bottom line is, it's up to more than just me. While I have become surprisingly, frankly, the voice or the face of a lot of social learning, simply because, as I pointed out before, I think that is something that's been around for so long. I cannot be the only one carrying this charge that social media should be for learning. It is for learning, and it's far more than a marketing message or a sales tool. It really is an opportunity for us to be reaching across the miles, deeper within our organizations, to be learning with one another. If it's to be, it's up to more than me. It's up to every single person who uses these light technologies. It's for every single person who has a care and a love of learning and is interested in learning more for themselves and helping the people that they work with learn more. It's up to you as well to be doing that and to be sharing these ideas. I'm not asking you to say exactly what I'm saying. There's no need for that whatsoever, but for you to truly be considering how you are learning, how you're using these tools, and to be sharing them with more people. The steps I encourage for doing that are to get clear. Figure out for yourself, do you like this idea? Do you not like this idea? Even if you don't like it, that's okay. But think about how you're already doing this. It's not something new you need to be adopting. It's something that you, I believe, are actively doing today with or without technology. You need to be thinking about how that fits into your life, if it's something that is comfortable for you, or if, frankly, you don't want anyone to know about anything you're doing. And then what that means in a society where people are becoming more and more mindful of how we interact with each other in formal and informal ways. Then get informed. Learn as much as you can, either through books like The New Social Learning, but there are a wide variety of amazing books on the market specifically for educators, but also I'm not encouraging you just even focus there, but on social media, on using some of these tools to be learning as much as you can. I've been pretty widely quoted as how I, for instance, started using Twitter, which was really to get back to my Fast Company editor, because I could not believe that she was wasting her time doing this. And the more I learned about it, the more exciting it was for me. And so I tried learning more and more about it. You can, I think, just Google how Marcia Connor got on Twitter or something like that. I can send the link too if we can't find it easily. But get informed, learn as much as you can. If you're a curious learner, this is your opportunity to be learning. And then get talking, start using it. It's not just a matter of getting clear and get informed, but actually get practicing. Try it out, see how it works for you, and you can only get better. For example, people have a hard time at the very beginning of on Twitter, for example, of writing in so few characters. You really do get better at it. The more you do it, the easier it gets, and the easier it is for you to convey the information you need to in a quick and concise manner. I'm quite reading a question again. Have you seen any changes in use and participation in social media for learning, especially in the ratio participant versus observer? I'm not quite sure I understand the second half of that, but have we seen changes in use? Well, I'd say the biggest change that we've seen in the last year is that it was crazy to even be suggesting that social media be used in a classroom, for example, a year ago by many, many people. And in fact, I would say there are plenty of classrooms, corporate and academic, that still find the idea just nutty. But Jane Bozarth wrote a wonderful book specifically for educators about social media use in the classroom. And we're beginning to see people think, oh, my students aren't paying attention to me. They're talking completely with their friends and colleagues outside the room. Maybe I should get in on this. Maybe I should be thinking about how I can use these technologies for good, as opposed to what they perceive as being a distraction. I personally don't believe that it's entirely a distraction. I think it's a way that they're engaging their thinking. And it's a different way that we view education. But we do see a transformation, a changing of people who are formal educators, of thinking of how they can use these tools to be able to, for example, have people be more reflective, for example, of after class. They may be able to reflect on what they've learned. They may be able to just capture how they're beginning to apply the information in the outside world. That's a very simple example, not even in a classroom, but after the fact. Another one is for people to be able to build some sense of community and understanding of one another before they get to a room. Again, very low in terms of a threat to what's happening inside of a classroom, but just to be able to get people to gather and learn a little bit about each other, and maybe potentially even learn a little bit about the materials beforehand, or say to reflect afterwards. That's already a shift and a change that we're beginning to see. And then we're beginning to see more and more examples of people using some of these technologies to be able to toss out questions, for them to be able to gather together. I heard a wonderful story just recently of an educator, college educator, who was using these technologies where he sort of tossed his entire curriculum. He said, here are the things I want you to learn, but you work together to figure out how you're going to learn these. And it was really a very, from his perspective, a very risky thing to do, but he found that they learned so much more than he could have ever presented to them, that the people together were pulling in ideas and perspectives that he never would have even considered, that he learned more than he had in 20 years of teaching. And so it was an opportunity for people to work together using these technologies in order to meet the objectives that he had set out, and they had just far expanded those technologies in ways that he had not considered before. Let me see what other questions. Hold on a second. Examples of large organizations using social learning, how and what is used. The new social learning, I don't mean just to plug that, but that'd be the easiest way. We have 120 case examples in that book. Not all of them large organizations, but many of them large organizations. Everything from the Mayo Clinic, which is a large healthcare organization within the US, and they have people around the world. You have organizations like TELUS, the governments around the world, banks. I have not found a sector yet that is not having large organizations doing this, and they're not using what would be considered traditional tools. So now we have all the learning management system vendors, for example, saying now that they have social media tools. Again, if we go back to what I said earlier, that you are learning socially already, and we don't necessarily need new tools specifically for that. I think that actually, I once referred to that as trying to hold sunlight in a jar. It begins to feel very confined and very limited. It really is an opportunity for people to be connecting, using whatever they normally and naturally would want to be using, as opposed to, I'm not a big believer that you need to have specific tools in order to learn together. That would be saying, that you need a megaphone, for example, to carry your voice. Yes, it's a tool to augment your natural capabilities, but let's focus more on how you want to connect and not so much on the tools and that word. But again, new social learning, 120 examples. And all of my Fast Company columns, all the writing I do, I'm trying to put out as many examples as I possibly can. But I have 20 or more large scale clients who are doing this, and we're beginning to write more and more about them. And hopefully there'll be ample examples for you to be able to access in that sort of way. Another question was, for the last years, people have registered that only CA, not sure CA in this case, 4% are active in social media, 90% only observe and watch. Well, couple things. First of all, the very first question that was asked was about behavior change, for example. And if we view those numbers as that somebody has to be talking in order to be learning, I would actually ask you to ask that question about anything you're doing in life. So if you're driving down the road and you see a sign and you just see that this is the exit, did you need to say anything in order to learn that this is the exit you need to get off on? Of course not. Much of our learning throughout life, again, is listening, is in taking things in around us, considering them. And then we may turn to the person sitting next to us in the vehicle and say, oh, this is the stop to get off on. I'm not to suggest that social learning can't be done in different sorts of ways, but I think it's naive of us to think that learning and listening and observing two or more people, but even just the world around us, the interactions that are taking, are not valuable. I believe them, pardon me, to be very valuable. And for the first time ever, people are contributing in different sorts of ways. So if you right now are listening to this and watching, in fact, the conversation going on, some people asking questions, and then you are turning to somebody else, or more importantly, in an hour from now or 5 hours from now, you then comment to someone else and you engage in a conversation about what was said here. And I sure hope you do that. I sure hope you engage in conversations. Why isn't that valuable? Of course that's valuable. And it doesn't mean that somebody has to talk or have that confidence at that very moment to contribute. But if they are taking that information and using it and sharing it and asking questions and even asking themselves questions over time, then this idea that lurking, which is those unsaid, there's people who are not commenting right then and there, then the value is still very, very high. And so what we're beginning to see, thankfully, is more and more conversation that lurking isn't a bad thing. It's what people do to be able to take in information if they're distracted at the time, or if they just don't feel like they have something important to contribute at that moment in the conversation. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be socializing the information, asking questions, and using that information in order to be able to progress. And that's really what we're talking about, making sense of new ideas to be able to do new and different things. Let's see. There's a focus in Norway on the stressful crossover between work life and free time borders between them are torn down. Is the use of social media contributing to this? Well, yes and no. I would have to say that I feel personally far less stressed about my work life and my home life as a result of some of these tools. I know that I can be out with my young son doing something and I can check in, get it done, and move back to focus on him. And in the past, I may have, on my mind, oh, I need to be getting this done. And so the additional stresses that came as a result of the blending or the work and life has been weighing on our shoulders. But now we have the tools and technologies to be able to quickly, easily get in, do what needs to be done, and be able to change what we're doing and be able to learn in that even moment. I happen to have a 6-year-old, and the times that we're out and he asks a question, as 6-year-olds tend to do, that I think to myself, I have no idea in the world the answer to this, that I can very quickly, while very much attending to him, check on my phone to Google something to get an answer and be able to have a conversation, to truly be learning together as a result of that, to me is just an incredible opportunity for us to be learning from one another and be able to reach out. Even if not that long ago, my husband and I were driving. He was driving in the car, and we passed this incredible building that we'd never seen before. And I very quickly tweeted while in the car, and he's thinking, what is that? In the past, we would never know what that is. I just sent out a tweet. I'm on this road, and this is the building I saw. And within literally seconds, we had 5 responses back of people saying, this is the building, here's the history of it. I wasn't going to sit in the car and read those things. I was more interested in talking with him. But we had a conversation about the building and about things we haven't seen as a result of that. And so it was a wonderful conversation as a result of these technologies now being available while we are with other people. So yeah, get clear, get informed, get talking, and get started. I'm not suggesting you spend all of your time learning from one another using technology. I am suggesting you use as much time in your life as you can to be learning from one another. That not only just contributes to our sense of well-being, it allows us to evolve as individuals and as a species. And so the idea is not to be using this as a bad distraction from avoiding what you're doing. When I hear people say, well, at work, people are just doing these things and they're becoming very unproductive. Well, my hunch is that in many cases, they were pretty unproductive before. Maybe they had a false sense of what the work was, and now they are substituting these technologies for it. So what this has done is uncovered. Now, other people can see what they are doing because they're participating online. And that's an organizational issue that needs to be addressed. And that these have just made it more transparent, more available, and we now know about it. And so we need to deal with it. But I don't personally blame these tools for changing and making people more less productive. I view them as an opportunity if used in a way that we think about them as learning tools to gather information, to find the right people, to make connections, to improve our thinking, to evolve the way that we look at information and we look at one another in the world. I think that to be a healthy and useful sort of way. And the best way to do that is just to try. Stick your toe in the river and try that out. I, on that level, I try to be as approachable as I possibly can. Feel free to send me email or check out my blog, which is actually in the process of undergoing some changes, but by going to this link, you'll be able to find it, and you'll be able to find it in the future as well. And then on Twitter, I have a tremendous amount of conversations there, not taking time away from my family or my work, but just be able to quickly, pop in, get something said, or ask a question and be able to gather that information. And I would welcome the opportunity to continue this dialogue, not just across the miles, but using some of these technologies because they have made it so much easier for us to use. Likewise, the new social learning website has both most of the first chapter of our book available on it, as well as lists of technologies and resources that you can access. We're trying to make these as available as humanly possible. And as I said, I try to write on similar themes. I have been for a very long time to be able to make this information available to you free of charge, however you need to get it. So with that, say we have a few more minutes to be able to be answering questions. I welcome the opportunity to do that. And for us to be learning together. That is why I am in this. I'm in this specifically to be learning, to be growing, to be changing, to be evolving, because this is not only more fun and more interesting than the way we've looked at training and education in the past, but it's more engaging, it's more human. And I truly believe it has the opportunity to be able to help free us from some of the frankly awkward ways that we've approached education as a very one-way street in the past. And it gives me great hope that we're going in the right direction. So with that, I thank you very much for having me on this morning, and I look forward to answering additional questions or helping you however I can.
Thank you so much. Oh, I have really enjoyed to listen to you, and I have also enjoyed very much your slides. Especially this oak plant is such a wonderful picture. But maybe some people have a question or two. We have 5 minutes left. In the meantime, I could put my question. Maybe, Marcia, you stop your microphone for a moment because we make echo. Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking about new social learning. It is often kind of learning just in time. It's in bits and pieces. And for me, when I have to learn something, I so much like to have some structure. For example, when I was young, I wanted to learn to be a journalist. I learned from an old editor, and he told me so many things, but it was very difficult. It was like cows. But then I started to study in a school, and I got the structure of the things, and everything became so much easier. So my question is, how do we structure this social learning? Have you thought about it, something in this way?
I'm assuming you can hear me again now. Excellent question, and one I receive quite often, and that is that each of us have a different way that we prefer to learn information. That's not just a simple personal preference, but it's based on what we have grown accustomed to, what we have found works for us. And there are many subjects, large subjects, for example, of writing or teaching or rocket science or engineering or medical skills, whatever we want to consider. Were very large, full, rich topics. Let's view this not as the solution, any more so than we view that when we talk about most all learning is informal. Sure, that should seem obvious to so many people, but there are times and places for more structured learning. This is not in opposition to that. That's not to suggest that we have to throw away all sorts of structure. If that's helpful for you, if in fact you are attempting to learn a large body of information, then find a source of finding that structure, but supplement it. Use the opportunity to learn from people around you in order to be adding to that. So it's not just the lessons learned from a professor or from a teacher or from a specific program, but recognize that that person only has a limited view. It may be a very wide and rich view, but there's so much more to be learned from additional people, maybe other people interested in learning that subject, or other experts around the world, or even somebody that you just meet casually who has some additional knowledge there. Don't view this as the opposite of learning in a structured sort of way. View it as a supplement, as an augmenting, as a continuation, as an evolutionary step to be able to make it a rich and robust experience. The sad fact is that we have so consistently considered it to be that to learn something, you learn it from one person in this structured manner. And that's just so limiting, and it's just not appropriate anymore, given a constantly changing world. There should be the opportunity for it to be broader and deeper and wider, and that's the adding to. It's not the taking away from something done in a structured way. But we also find is that there are some people who really do not do well in a very large structured setting. You happen to be one who does. There are many who don't. And those people have been very limited in their opportunity to be learning in the past. So whereas there have been many opportunities for large structured learning opportunities, educational opportunities in the past, for people who do far better at a piece at a time and stringing along a pearl necklace because they get a little bit here and a little bit here and they add to it and they try it on and they figure out how it works for them. Those people now have an opportunity to be learning big things, a little piece in a very unstructured way at a time. And what a great opportunity for us to now live in a world where both groups, or all the different variations there, now have an opportunity to be learning what they need to learn too. So it's just adding another layer, another approach, a new way that can meet different people's needs. And so it's not a replacement, but it's a different way, and it can be a supplement for you, and it can be the core for someone else, and all of those are okay. The bottom line coming back to what is it that you're trying to learn, and what is the method and style that works the best for you, and how can they be used together to create something more. So I said another question here I want to make sure that I get to for a second. I'm not sure I can get back to it. So what is, according to you, the number one reason why so many corporations are skeptical towards social learning? I find, frankly, that very few organizations are completely skeptical to social learning. What they are skeptical is to the idea of socializing, of actually talking to other people. That the idea that the instructor is not the sole expert is very scary. That's a fear-based perspective, that I know what I'm talking about, and if anybody else weighs in, then there's a likelihood you will not get the official answer. Well, that's a threat to people that what they have built their work on is no longer valid. Well, that's not true. Again, similar to the structured knowledge perspective, we have an opportunity to be learning from a wide variety of voices. They don't need to all be the certified expert perspective. It doesn't make them not valid. There are ways to validate them and to be able to look at a wide variety of information. So I would say overall, it is a fear of just the unknown, of not knowing where something is authenticated. And so as we draw to the end of our time today, I want to point out that this is an opportunity for us to be learning about how we are learning as well. And let's not just view this as an academic subject. I think that would be a horrible waste of time, frankly. But instead to be able to take this, try it out, see what works for you, see what doesn't work for you, and then try again and try and see what else can work for you, and to be able to go from there. The research that is available in this book is also widely supplemented from a large number of organizations on the web. I try to highlight that information both in my tweets and in my articles and my blogs and every place I possibly can whenever I find it, but there's a wealth of information available, and I encourage you to, with other people, find it, look for it, share it, and be able to help us all learn more together. Thank you.
I think we could have continued to put you questions for hours, but our time has passed, and a very warm thank you, Marcia. It was wonderful to listen to you. We have learned a lot, and we will continue the discussion. We will have more webinars. Our next webinar is on the 18th of March, 1 o'clock. The topic we will announce later on. Everybody most welcome to join us. And we will keep in touch with you, Marcia, and thank you so much. And I recommend your book. I'm going to continue my reading. And it was funny that I could buy it in $18 for a download. If I want it on paper, they will ship it from the United States to me for $50. That's the analog side of it.